Earth had always looked up at the stars with wonder. For centuries, humanity dreamed of life beyond the planet, curious and hopeful. But one day, that dream turned into a nightmare. The skies darkened as massive, silent ships hovered above major cities. These weren't visitors. They were invaders. The Galactic Empire had arrived, bringing with them alien warlords bent on conquest. The first sign was the blackout. Satellites and communication systems failed without warning. Within hours, global networks collapsed, leaving nations scrambling for answers. Panic set in when the ships revealed themselves. They weren't like anything humanity had imagined, towering structures of shimmering metal, pulsating with an ominous energy. Fear rippled through every corner of the globe. Messages of surrender boomed from the sky in every language, demanding Earth's immediate compliance. Resistance, they warned, would be met with destruction. The Galactic Empire wasn't new to conquest. For millennia, they had swept across galaxies, assimilating or eradicating civilizations. Earth was just another target in their endless expansion. But to them, it was more than just a planet. Earth was a strategic location, rich in natural resources, and positioned perfectly for galactic trade routes. To the warlords, humanity was insignificant, a nuisance to be crushed. The warlords themselves were terrifying. Towering creatures with grotesque features, they exuded power and cruelty. Their advanced armor and weapons made them nearly invincible. Each warlord was a leader of a legion, overseeing troops that obeyed without question. Their cold, calculated efficiency had brought countless planets to their knees. Their technology was centuries ahead of anything Earth could muster. Energy weapons, impenetrable shields, and ships capable of devastating entire cities were just the beginning. Earth's leaders tried to respond. Diplomatic channels were opened, messages of peace sent, but the invaders were uninterested. They viewed humanity as primitive and irrelevant. Their only reply came in the form of a demonstration, a small but horrifying example of their power. In a single strike, they vaporized a city. The devastation was instant, leaving nothing but a smoldering crater where life once thrived. The message was clear: resistance was futile. Chaos erupted worldwide. Governments declared states of emergency, while militaries scrambled to defend their nations. Yet, every attempt to fight back ended in disaster. Missiles and fighter jets were useless against the aliens' shields. Conventional warfare had no effect. Desperation grew as nations began turning against each other, blaming one another for attracting the invaders' attention. The unity humanity once dreamed of in the face of alien contact crumbled under fear and mistrust. In the midst of this chaos, whispers began to spread. Stories of a figure who had survived an encounter with the warlords. They spoke of someone who had stood their ground, who had fought back and won. At first, it seemed like a rumor, a desperate attempt to cling to hope. But as the days passed, the stories grew more detailed. People described a lone figure, clad in worn leather and armed with weapons that seemed both ancient and futuristic. A shadow, moving unseen, striking with precision and vanishing before the aliens could retaliate. No one knew where this figure had come from or why they were fighting. Some said they were a former soldier, abandoned by their country. Others believed they were an outlaw, a relic of the past. But all agreed on one thing: this mysterious individual, this gunslinger, was humanity's only hope. The invaders might have their warlords, but Earth had its own defender, one who refused to bow. The gunslinger's first actions were subtle. Small groups of alien scouts sent to patrol the wastelands vanished without a trace. Their equipment would later be found dismantled, their bodies left as warnings. These acts, while minor, were significant. They were the first signs of resistance that had succeeded. People began to notice, and soon the gunslinger became a symbol of defiance. While governments struggled to maintain order, the gunslinger operated alone, working outside the system. They didn't care about politics or power, their only goal was to protect humanity. They studied the invaders, learning their weaknesses and exploiting their arrogance. The Galactic Empire, so used to easy victories, underestimated the resolve of a single individual. The warlords, however, were not oblivious. They recognized the threat the gunslinger posed. While small, these acts of resistance disrupted their operations and emboldened the human population. The Warlords sent specialized units to hunt this rogue defender, but the gunslinger was always one step ahead. They moved through the shadows, striking with precision and disappearing before the aliens could react. The gunslinger wasn't just a fighter, they were a tactician. They understood that humanity couldn't win with brute force. Instead, they used the terrain to their advantage. Earth's rugged landscapes became their ally, providing cover and opportunities for ambushes. The aliens, unfamiliar with the planet's environment, found themselves at a disadvantage. As the Warlords increased their efforts to capture the gunslinger, they began to make mistakes. Their overconfidence led them into traps, their advanced technology rendered useless in the face of human ingenuity. The gunslinger's actions inspired others to fight back. Small groups of resistance fighters began to form, taking up arms and using the tactics they had seen. While the gunslinger remained a mystery, their impact was undeniable. The Galactic Empire had expected an easy conquest. They believed Earth would fall like the countless other planets they had subdued. But the presence of the gunslinger disrupted their plans. This lone individual, armed with little more than determination and skill, became the embodiment of humanity's resilience. The Warlords, for the first time in their long history of conquest, faced an enemy they couldn't easily defeat. And so, the stage was set. The Galactic Empire, with its warlords and advanced technology, against Earth's mysterious gunslinger. It wasn't a war of equals, but it was a war nonetheless. Humanity, though battered and divided, had found a spark of hope. And the gunslinger, the shadow in the chaos, was determined to keep that spark alive. The fight for Earth had begun. The gunslinger's story was shrouded in mystery, known only through fragmented tales whispered among the survivors. A figure forged in hardship, their existence was the result of a world that had long flirted with chaos even before the alien invasion. Once an ordinary individual, their life had been shaped by loss, betrayal, and the constant need to adapt. They had seen humanity's best and worst and learned to thrive in the spaces where others faltered. No one knew the gunslinger's true name. What was certain, however, was their unmatched skill. They were a master marksman, capable of impossible precision with weapons that seemed outdated by modern standards. Their tools of choice included a modified revolver, a relic from a forgotten time, and a rifle enhanced with scavenged alien technology. These weapons were more than tools, they were extensions of the gunslinger's will. In their hands, every shot was deliberate, calculated, and devastating. The gunslinger was more than just a fighter. They were a survivor. Years of navigating lawless lands, battling raiders, and enduring the harsh realities of a fractured Earth had turned them into a legend. They thrived where others perished, understanding that survival was as much about wit as it was about strength. They could read a battlefield like a map, predicting enemy movements and finding weaknesses others missed. This ability set them apart, making them a force the alien warlords had not anticipated. The gunslinger's past hinted at military origins. Some believed they were a soldier who had once served in one of Earth's elite units, possibly abandoned by their comrades during a disastrous mission. Others speculated they were a former mercenary, someone who had traded loyalty for coin until a personal tragedy led them to a different path. Whatever the truth, the gunslinger carried the scars of their past, both physical and emotional. Each encounter with the invaders was as much a personal battle as it was a fight for humanity. What set the gunslinger apart wasn't just their skill or their resilience. It was their philosophy. They didn't fight for governments or corporations. They fought for people. To them, humanity wasn't defined by the systems that had failed so spectacularly in the face of the invasion. It was defined by the individuals who refused to give up, who found ways to resist even when the odds were insurmountable. The gunslinger didn't see themselves as a savior. They were simply someone who refused to let humanity's story end without a fight. The first encounters with the alien warlords were brutal. The gunslinger had no illusions about the strength of the enemy. The warlords were larger, faster, and equipped with technology that defied comprehension. Their energy shields made direct confrontation almost impossible, and their weapons could incinerate a target in seconds. But the gunslinger didn't rely on brute force. They relied on strategy. They studied the warlords, learning their patterns, observing how their shields worked and where their blind spots lay. Each skirmish was a lesson, and the gunslinger was a fast learner. The turning point came when the gunslinger discovered a critical flaw in the warlords' equipment. Their shields, though nearly impenetrable, had a slight delay when reactivating after being disabled. It was a window of opportunity measured in milliseconds, but for the gunslinger, it was enough. Armed with this knowledge, they began to target the warlords' ground troops, exploiting their overconfidence and creating disruptions in their ranks. Each success emboldened the resistance, proving that the invaders weren't invincible. The gunslinger's actions didn't go unnoticed. The warlords recognized the threat posed by this lone figure and began to focus their efforts on eliminating them. Specialized hunting parties were dispatched, equipped with advanced tracking systems and weapons designed to counter Earth's limited defenses. But the gunslinger was always one step ahead. They understood the terrain in ways the invaders never could. Earth's forests, mountains, and urban ruins became their allies, providing cover and opportunities for ambushes that the warlords could not predict. The gunslinger's success wasn't just about their own abilities. It was about their ability to inspire. Stories of their victories spread like wildfire, reaching even the most isolated pockets of survivors. People who had once felt powerless began to believe that resistance was possible. Small groups began to form, following the gunslinger's example. They learned to adapt, using whatever resources they had to strike back. The gunslinger didn't lead these groups directly, but their actions served as a blueprint for rebellion. Despite their growing legend, the gunslinger remained a solitary figure. They operated on the fringes, avoiding the spotlight and focusing on the mission. This wasn't about glory or recognition. It was about survival. The gunslinger knew that humanity's best chance lay in decentralized resistance. The warlords could crush armies, but they couldn't easily defeat a movement built on countless individuals fighting in their own way. The gunslinger's role was to keep that spark alive, to ensure that humanity didn't lose hope. Their encounters with the warlords were increasingly dangerous. Each skirmish pushed the gunslinger to their limits, forcing them to innovate and adapt. They began to incorporate alien technology into their arsenal, scavenging equipment from defeated enemies and repurposing it for their own use. This blend of old and new became a defining characteristic of the gunslinger's approach. It was a reflection of humanity itself, a species that had always thrived by combining tradition with innovation. The warlords grew frustrated with their inability to eliminate the gunslinger. They were used to overwhelming their enemies through sheer power, but the gunslinger refused to play by their rules. Each encounter exposed new vulnerabilities, forcing the invaders to adapt in ways they weren't accustomed to. This was more than just a battle of weapons. It was a battle of minds, and the gunslinger was determined to outthink their enemy at every turn. Through it all, the gunslinger remained focused on the larger goal. The warlords weren't just a physical threat, they represented an existential challenge to humanity's future. The gunslinger understood that defeating them would require more than individual victories. It would require a shift in how humanity saw itself. The invasion had revealed humanity's flaws, its divisions, its short-sightedness, but it had also revealed its potential. The gunslinger fought not just to survive, but to protect the possibility of a better future. In the end, the gunslinger's strength wasn't just in their skill or their strategy. It was in their ability to remind humanity of what it could be. The warlords had brought war to Earth, but the gunslinger had brought something far more powerful: hope. And in a world on the brink of destruction, hope was the greatest weapon of all. The war had begun with despair. Humanity had been battered, its defenses overwhelmed, and its leaders paralyzed by fear. But the gunslinger's defiance lit a spark that refused to die. As word spread of their victories against the alien invaders, that spark grew into something larger, an ember of resistance. Across the broken cities and desolate wastelands, survivors began to organize. What had once been isolated acts of survival now became coordinated efforts to fight back. The gunslinger's presence was a catalyst. Though they rarely stayed in one place for long, their actions left a lasting impact. Wherever they struck, people took notice. They watched, learned, and began to emulate the tactics. In areas where no formal leadership existed, communities started forming around shared goals, defending what little they had left and pushing back against the invaders. It wasn't much, but it was a start. At first, the resistance was scattered. Groups of survivors worked independently, each focused on protecting their own territories. Communication was difficult, with most modern infrastructure destroyed or monitored by the alien forces. But the Gunslinger's message was clear: humanity couldn't afford to fight alone. Through small acts of coordination, sharing supplies, exchanging information, and planning ambushes, these scattered groups slowly began to connect. Trust was hard-won, but necessity forced cooperation. The Gunslingers' involvement wasn't direct. They avoided taking command, understanding that centralized leadership could become a vulnerability. Instead, they offered guidance. Survivors spoke of brief encounters where the Gunslinger would provide advice or demonstrate tactics before disappearing again. These moments were enough to inspire action. The Gunslinger didn't need to stay. Their example was enough to show that the fight could be won, even against an enemy as overwhelming as the Galactic Empire. The resistance wasn't just made up of fighters. Scientists, engineers, and medics played crucial roles in keeping the movement alive. Salvaging alien technology became a priority, with teams working tirelessly to understand and reverse engineer the invaders' equipment. Every discovery brought new possibilities. Energy weapons were adapted for human use, communication devices were repurposed, and even rudimentary shielding systems began to emerge. These innovations leveled the playing field, if only slightly. Meanwhile, the Gunslinger emphasized the importance of unconventional warfare. They taught survivors how to think creatively, using Earth's terrain to their advantage. Guerrilla tactics became the cornerstone of the Resistance's strategy. Alien patrols were ambushed in narrow mountain passes, supply lines were sabotaged in dense forests, and urban ruins became deadly traps. The Warlords, accustomed to overwhelming their enemies with superior technology, found themselves struggling against a foe they couldn't predict. One of the Resistance's greatest strengths was its diversity. People from all walks of life contributed to the cause, bringing unique skills and perspectives. Former soldiers shared their combat expertise, while farmers used their knowledge of the land to set up hidden supply routes. Hackers worked tirelessly to disrupt alien communications, while artists inspired hope through messages scrawled across city ruins. Everyone had a role to play, and no contribution was too small. The Resistance's first major success came not from a large-scale battle but from a coordinated series of small victories. The Gunslinger had shown that the Warlords were not invincible, and the Resistance proved it further. By targeting vulnerable outposts and supply chains, they disrupted the invaders' operations. These victories were symbolic as much as they were strategic. For the first time, humanity wasn't just surviving, it was fighting back. The Warlords, frustrated by their inability to crush the Resistance, began to respond with increasing brutality. Civilian areas were targeted in an effort to break morale, and any captured Resistance fighters were made examples of. But this only strengthened humanity's resolve. The Gunslinger's philosophy had taken root. The war wasn't just about survival. It was about proving that humanity's spirit couldn't be extinguished. Amid the growing resistance, the Gunslinger remained a constant yet elusive presence. They didn't seek recognition, nor did they accept praise. Their focus was always on the mission, and their methods remained unchanged. Precision, adaptability, and determination were their tools, and they wielded them with unmatched skill. The Resistance fighters who encountered the Gunslinger often described them as both inspiring and intimidating. They were a figure who seemed almost mythic, a symbol of what humanity could achieve when pushed to the brink. As the Resistance grew stronger, it also became more organized. Leaders emerged from within its ranks, ordinary people who rose to the challenge of guiding others. These leaders weren't chosen through formal elections or political processes. They earned their positions through actions, proving their ability to inspire trust and make difficult decisions. The Gunslingers' influence was evident in their leadership styles. They prioritized the survival of their people over personal glory and focused on the larger goal of defeating the invaders. The Resistance's success wasn't without cost. Every victory came with losses, and every setback was a reminder of the war's stakes. Resources were scarce, and the alien forces continued to evolve, adapting to humanity's tactics. The Gunslinger understood this better than anyone. They knew that while small victories were important, they wouldn't be enough to win the war. The Resistance needed to grow, to become something the Warlords couldn't ignore. Over time, the Resistance began to shift from a defensive posture to an offensive one. This transition wasn't easy. It required careful planning, coordination, and a willingness to take risks. The Gunslinger played a key role in this process, using their experience to guide the Resistance's strategies. They identified weak points in the aliens' operations and helped the Resistance exploit them. Every action was deliberate, designed to maximize impact while minimizing casualties. Despite the Resistance's progress, the Gunslinger never lost sight of the larger picture. They understood that humanity's survival depended not just on defeating the Warlords but on what came after. The invasion had exposed humanity's weaknesses, its divisions, its reliance on fragile systems, and its tendency to prioritize power over people. The Gunslinger fought not just to drive the invaders away but to give humanity a chance to rebuild, stronger and more united than before. The Resistance wasn't perfect. Mistakes were made, and disagreements occasionally threatened to fracture the movement. But these challenges were met with the same determination that had fueled the fight from the beginning. The Gunslinger's example reminded everyone that failure was not an option. Humanity couldn't afford to lose this war, not just for its own sake but for the sake of every species that might one day face the Galactic Empire's wrath. The alien warlords were growing impatient. Their plans for Earth, which should have been a swift conquest, had devolved into a prolonged struggle. They had underestimated humanity's resilience, and now they were paying the price. The Resistance had become a thorn in their side, disrupting supply chains, sabotaging key operations, and evading capture at every turn. The Gunslinger's influence loomed large over these efforts, and the Warlords recognized that as long as this figure remained free, their grip on Earth would weaken. In response, the Warlords escalated their tactics. They unleashed devastating counterattacks, targeting both Resistance strongholds and civilian populations. Cities already crippled by the invasion were reduced to ashes. Their message was clear: defiance would not be tolerated. The devastation wasn't just physical, it was psychological. By striking indiscriminately, the Warlords hoped to break humanity's spirit. Survivors were left grappling with loss and fear, questioning whether resistance was worth the cost. Despite the destruction, the Gunslinger and the Resistance refused to back down. Yet, this new phase of the war tested them like never before. The Warlords began deploying specialized forces designed to hunt Resistance cells with surgical precision. These units, equipped with advanced tracking systems and stealth technology, were unlike the blunt forces previously used. They operated with ruthless efficiency, and their mission was simple: eliminate the Resistance at all costs. The Resistance adapted, but not without significant losses. Groups that had once thrived on mobility found themselves cornered. Some were wiped out entirely, their sacrifices a stark reminder of the war's stakes. The Gunslinger, too, faced challenges that pushed them to their limits. Their usual tactics of striking from the shadows and disappearing were now met with counters they hadn't encountered before. The Warlords were learning, and their adjustments made every move riskier. In the midst of these challenges, cracks began to form within the Resistance. As the Warlords intensified their attacks, tensions grew among the survivors. Some questioned the Gunslinger's approach, arguing that it wasn't enough to match the Warlords' growing might. Others advocated for surrender, believing that survival, even under alien rule, was better than annihilation. These divisions threatened to derail the movement, and the Gunslinger had to find a way to hold everything together. The situation became even more complicated with the emergence of traitors within humanity's ranks. A small but influential faction saw collaboration with the Warlords as a path to survival. They offered information, resources, and even manpower to the invaders in exchange for protection and power. This betrayal was a blow to the Resistance, not just strategically but morally. It revealed humanity's capacity for self-destruction, even in the face of a common enemy. The Gunslinger faced a difficult choice. The traitors were a clear threat to the Resistance's survival, but hunting them down would divert precious resources and energy. At the same time, ignoring them would allow the Warlords to exploit the division. The Gunslinger, ever pragmatic, chose a middle path. They exposed the traitors' actions to the larger Resistance network, rallying survivors to reject their betrayal. While this didn't eliminate the threat entirely, it neutralized much of its impact. Despite these setbacks, the Resistance continued to evolve. Every loss, every betrayal, and every hardship forced them to adapt. They became more disciplined, more resourceful, and more unified. The Gunslinger's example remained a source of inspiration, reminding them that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the fight was worth it. The Warlords' attempts to crush the Resistance only strengthened its resolve, proving that their brute force approach had limits. The Gunslinger also discovered something critical during this time. The Warlords' over-reliance on technology was both their greatest strength and their greatest weakness. Their advanced systems, while powerful, were vulnerable to disruption. The Resistance began focusing their efforts on exploiting this vulnerability. Hackers worked tirelessly to disrupt alien communications, while engineers developed makeshift devices to interfere with their tracking systems. These efforts didn't level the playing field entirely, but they provided the Resistance with valuable breathing room. The turning point came when the Gunslinger uncovered a key piece of intelligence. During a raid on a heavily fortified alien facility, they discovered evidence of a central command structure that coordinated the Warlords' operations. This command center, located aboard the massive mothership hovering in Earth's orbit, was the nerve center of the invasion. Destroying it wouldn't end the war, but it would cripple the Warlords' ability to coordinate their forces effectively. This revelation shifted the Resistance's focus. For months, their efforts had been scattered, targeting alien outposts and supply lines without a clear endgame. Now they had a goal: to take the fight directly to the heart of the invasion. The Gunslinger, recognizing the importance of this mission, began to rally the Resistance around this singular objective. It was a gamble, but it was also their best chance at turning the tide of the war. The Warlords, aware of the Resistance's growing confidence, redoubled their efforts to crush them. They unleashed new weapons, monstrous machines designed to instill fear and devastation. These creations, towering over human forces, seemed unstoppable. Yet, even in the face of these horrors, the Resistance pressed on. They adapted their tactics, using hit-and-run strategies to chip away at the Warlords' strength. The escalating conflict took a toll on everyone involved. The Resistance was stretched thin, its fighters worn down by constant battles. Civilians, caught in the crossfire, faced unimaginable hardships. The Gunslinger bore the weight of these struggles, knowing that every decision carried life-or-death consequences. They couldn't afford to make mistakes, not when the stakes were this high. Despite the challenges, hope remained. The Gunslinger's discovery of the command center had given the Resistance a purpose, and their efforts to prepare for the final push continued unabated. They scavenged what resources they could, refined their strategies, and strengthened their resolve. The Warlords, for all their power, had underestimated humanity's capacity for endurance. As the Resistance prepared for the final phase of their campaign, the Gunslinger reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The Warlords had come to Earth expecting an easy conquest, but they had found something far more difficult: a species that refused to bow. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, the Gunslinger allowed themselves a small measure of hope. The Warlords might be powerful, but humanity had proven that it was stronger than they could have ever imagined. The final confrontation was inevitable. Every battle, every sacrifice, and every moment of resistance had led to this point. The Warlords still held the advantage in technology and numbers, but their arrogance had cost them. They underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, to endure, and to strike when it mattered most. Now, the Resistance had its sights set on the heart of the invasion, the alien mothership that loomed ominously over Earth, controlling the Warlords' operations and serving as their ultimate fortress. The Gunslinger knew this would be the most dangerous mission yet. The mothership wasn't just a command center, it was a symbol of the Galactic Empire's dominance. Its destruction wouldn't just disrupt the invasion, it would shatter the invaders' perception of their invincibility. But getting there would require more than determination. It would demand precise planning, unshakable resolve, and sacrifices that couldn't be undone. The Resistance worked tirelessly to prepare. Scientists, engineers, and tacticians pooled their knowledge to devise a plan. Using intelligence gathered from previous skirmishes, they identified weaknesses in the mothership's defenses. Its shields were nearly impenetrable, but they required enormous amounts of energy to sustain. If the Resistance could overload the energy grid, even briefly, it would create an opening for an attack. It was a long shot, but it was their only chance. The Gunslinger played a central role in these preparations. Their knowledge of alien technology and combat tactics proved invaluable. They identified key vulnerabilities in the Warlords' forces and coordinated efforts to exploit them. Every detail of the plan was scrutinized, every contingency considered. The Gunslinger understood that failure wasn't an option. The Resistance couldn't afford to regroup after this. It was now or never. As the day of the operation approached, the Resistance mobilized its forces. Fighters prepared for what they knew could be their last battle, while support teams worked around the clock to ensure everything was ready. Morale was a mix of determination and dread. Everyone knew the odds were against them, but the Gunslinger's presence provided a sense of confidence. They had led the Resistance this far, and their example reminded everyone of what was at stake. The operation began with coordinated strikes against key alien installations on Earth. These attacks served two purposes: to divert the Warlords' attention and to weaken their grip on the planet. The Resistance launched a series of simultaneous assaults, pushing the invaders to respond with their full strength. The Gunslinger led one of these strikes, demonstrating the same precision and decisiveness that had become their trademark. Each victory chipped away at the Warlords' resources and morale, setting the stage for the final push. While the battles raged on the surface, a smaller team prepared to infiltrate the mothership. This team, handpicked by the Gunslinger, included the Resistance's most skilled fighters and engineers. Their mission was clear: to breach the mothership's defenses, disable its energy grid, and deliver a blow that would cripple the invaders' operations. It was a near-suicidal task, but everyone involved understood its importance. The infiltration began with a daring maneuver. Using stolen alien technology, the team bypassed the mothership's perimeter defenses, slipping through unnoticed. Once inside, they encountered the full extent of the Galactic Empire's technological superiority. The corridors were labyrinthine, filled with automated defenses and patrolled by elite warlord forces. Every step forward was a battle, every inch gained a testament to the team's determination. As the team pushed deeper into the mothership, they encountered resistance unlike anything they had faced before. The Warlords, aware of the infiltration, deployed their most advanced units to stop them. The Gunslinger, leading the charge, demonstrated unmatched skill and leadership. They fought with a precision that inspired those around them, turning the tide of the battle even in the direst moments. Eventually, the team reached the core of the mothership's energy grid. This was the linchpin of the entire operation. Disabling it would require precise timing and coordination, as well as a willingness to take risks that bordered on reckless. The Gunslinger took charge, coordinating the team's efforts and ensuring that every step of the plan was executed flawlessly. Despite heavy resistance, they managed to overload the grid, creating the opening they had worked so hard to achieve. The moment the grid collapsed, the mothership's shields flickered and fell. It was a brief window, but it was enough. Resistance forces on the ground launched a full-scale assault, targeting the now vulnerable mothership with everything they had. The Warlords, caught off guard, scrambled to respond, but the damage had been done. Explosions rippled through the mothership, causing chaos among its ranks. The Gunslinger and the infiltration team, now fighting their way out, encountered the Warlords' highest-ranking leader. This was the figure who had orchestrated the invasion, a being whose presence exuded authority and menace. The confrontation was inevitable. The Gunslinger, battered but unyielding, faced this final adversary with the same determination that had carried them through countless battles. The duel was fierce, a clash of strength, skill, and will. The warlord, armed with the most advanced weaponry the Empire had to offer, fought with a ferocity that pushed the gunslinger to their limits. But the gunslinger's adaptability and resilience proved to be the deciding factors. They found a way to exploit the warlord's arrogance, delivering a decisive blow that ended the fight. With their leader defeated and the mothership in ruins, the remaining warlords retreated. The Galactic Empire's forces, once so confident in their dominance, now faced the reality of defeat. The invasion wasn't over, but the tide had turned. Humanity had done what seemed impossible. It had pushed back against the most powerful force in the galaxy and emerged victorious. The aftermath of the battle was bittersweet. The cost of victory had been high, with countless lives lost and entire cities destroyed. The resistance, though triumphant, was left to grapple with the weight of its sacrifices. The gunslinger, as always, refused to take credit for the victory. They disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind a legacy that would inspire generations to come. Humanity began the long process of rebuilding. The scars of the invasion would take years, perhaps decades, to heal. But the war had shown what humanity was capable of when united by a common purpose. The gunslinger's fight had been more than just a battle for survival, it had been a battle for humanity's soul. And in the end, that fight had been won.